Look at the relentless rhythm of the laser printer. The official seal of the United States Senate stamps onto the page, hot and definitive. The ink spells out phrases that defy reality. Non-human intelligence, technologies of unknown origin, eminent domain. This is not a Hollywood script. This is the National Defense Authorization Act of 2024. The government did not announce our cosmic demotion with a global press conference. They did it with a bureaucratic property seizure law. While you are watching this video, arguing over trivial politics or scrolling through endless algorithmic feeds, a shadow war is raging right above your head. It is a quiet war fought over physical artifacts that violently break the known laws of thermodynamics. If you do not understand the legal maneuvers currently happening in the windowless, dark corners of the Capitol, you are completely blind. You are missing the undeniable fact that human supremacy on Earth has already been legally questioned. You are programmed to believe that we are alone in the universe, a comforting myth taught in every high school physics class. I'm going to tear that myth apart. We are going to read this legislation not as a dry political document, but as a desperate ransom note left by a terrified empire. I will show you the exact, unprecedented legal mechanism the United States created to deal with the terrifying realization that humanity is no longer the apex predator of its own airspace. We move into the cold, silent halls of the National Archives at night. This is the vault of American reality. Here rests the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Atomic Energy Act, the foundational code of a superpower. But abruptly, the historical montage violently stops on a stack of plain white printer paper. The camera pushes in on the stark typography, treating the black ink on the page as physical evidence at a planetary crime scene. As a researcher, I look at this document and see an absolute anomaly. You've been told that unidentified phenomena are weather balloons, swamp gas, or sensor glitches. Yet the existence of this specific, legally binding terminology buried deep inside a defense bill shatters that illusion. We are dealing with an ontological shock documented in Times New Roman. This is the Schumer-Rounds Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Act, and it is a 64-page admission of total powerlessness. In July of 2023, the paradigm fundamentally shifted without a single siren sounding. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, acting with rare and urgent bipartisan support, introduced this massive amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. This was not a fringe political stunt by junior lawmakers seeking airtime. This was a calculated, deliberate strike initiated by the highest-ranking officials in the intelligence apparatus of the United States government. Read the text closely. The precise clinical phrase, non-human intelligence, does not appear just once as a clerical error or a legal hypothetical. It is stamped into the legislation exactly 22 times. In the rigid, unforgiving architecture of federal law, every single word carries the weight of billion-dollar budgets and military action. You do not repeat a term 22 times in a defense bill unless the threat it describes is physically sitting in a hangar somewhere on Earth. The authors of the bill left zero room for misinterpretation or semantic escape. The legislation explicitly defines non-human intelligence as any sentient, intelligent, non-human life form that is responsible for unidentified anomalous phenomena. They are legally codifying the existence of an intellect that operates entirely outside our biological and technological evolutionary tree. It is a sterile, legal recognition of a reality that should absolutely paralyze you with existential dread. You must understand the sheer audacity of this legal framework. We are not talking about microbial life on Mars or distant radio signals from the TRAPPIST-1 system. We are talking about a sentient presence currently interacting with our military infrastructure. The legislation acknowledges a technologically superior architect operating within our atmosphere, treating our advanced fighter jets like slow, clumsy insects caught in a complex, multi-dimensional web we cannot even perceive. This brings us to the most aggressive provision hidden within the 64 pages. The bill mandated the immediate exercise of eminent domain. That is the ultimate sovereign right of the government to expropriate private property for public use. But they were not trying to seize land for a highway. They authorized the federal government to aggressively seize any recovered technologies of unknown origin currently locked away and hidden by highly classified private aerospace corporations. Let that legal maneuver sink into your mind. The United States Senate explicitly wrote a law to confiscate alien hardware from private companies. This proves the government believes that unelected aerospace executives are hoarding materials that defy the periodic table. We are witnessing a desperate superpower trying to legally pry the greatest scientific discovery in human history out of the hands of defense contractors who have kept the universe locked in a corporate vault for decades. The document lying in front of us is the ultimate corpse in this cosmic detective story. It is the undeniable physical proof of a shattered reality. You have to ask yourself a terrifying question. Why would the most powerful legislative body in the world risk total global humiliation, financial instability, and diplomatic chaos to aggressively pass a detailed law about a phenomenon that supposedly does not exist? Bureaucrats do not legislate phantoms. They legislate tangible threats. The absolute panic encoded in this 64-page amendment is not about the fear of an invasion. It is the cold, administrative terror of realizing the government lost control of the sky, and worse, lost control of the recovered technology itself. If the Senate was forced to deploy the nuclear option of eminent domain just to get their own artifacts back, we must ask the next inevitable question. What exactly is waiting inside those classified private laboratories? To understand why the Senate panicked in 2023, we must look at the data that finally broke the Pentagon's internal walls of denial. The answer to what lies hidden in those corporate vaults begins not with a crashed hull, but with a digital ghost. A phantom that shattered our illusion of atmospheric supremacy and forced the intelligence community to accept a mathematically impossible reality. Look over the shoulder of an Intelligence Committee staffer deep in a windowless Capitol basement. They are staring at declassified telemetry from a naval radar operator's screen. There are no blurry photographs here, only the pure, cold mathematics of a god caught on a sensor sweep. Before you can draft a law to seize an off-world artifact, you first have to prove that your multi-billion-dollar early warning systems are actually tracking them. The legislation you thought was just bureaucratic noise was a direct, panicked response to classified briefings regarding incidents like the 2004 USS Nimitz encounter off the coast of Southern California. For years, the official narrative fed to you was that these anomalies were just sensor glitches or swamp gas. But the staffer reviewing this file knows that a carrier strike group does not suffer a collective multi-sensor hallucination. Focus on the green, hypnotic sweep of the radar display. This is the nervous system of the most advanced naval armada on the planet. The operator watches a blip appear, representing an object with no wings, no exhaust, and no flight surfaces. Your high school textbooks promised you that everything operating within our atmosphere must obey the strict, unforgiving laws of aerodynamics. That comforting lie is about to be violently erased. According to the hardened data logs, the Princeton's SPY-1 radar, the premier missile defense system of the United States Navy, tracked these objects dropping from an altitude of 80,000 feet down to sea level. And it completed this descent in less than 1 second. The staffer traces the trajectory with a trembling finger, realizing this is not an aircraft. It is a terrifying violation of every mechanical boundary we have ever engineered. I want you to critically examine the sheer absurdity of that drop. You were programmed to believe that technological progress is a slow, linear crawl. We iterate on jet engines and aerodynamics, claiming mastery over the sky. But the numbers blinking in this classified briefing mock our entire scientific heritage. This is not the next generation of human flight. This is a completely different paradigm of physics, treating our atmosphere like a vacuum. When astrophysicists and defense analysts finally published peer-reviewed papers analyzing this exact telemetry, the conclusions were mathematically devastating. Executing a maneuver that drops an object from the stratosphere to the ocean's surface in a fraction of a second requires the craft to accelerate at over 600 g-forces. It is a number so extreme that it instantly renders the entire global defense industrial complex fundamentally obsolete. To truly grasp your own insignificance, look at our biological and structural limits. A highly trained human pilot completely blacks out, losing total consciousness at 9 g-forces. Our absolute strongest titanium airframes, the pride of human metallurgy, will violently disintegrate in mid-air at 20 g-forces. At 600 g-forces, any conventional matter built by human hands would be instantly crushed into an unrecognizable smear of subatomic debris. But the true intellectual horror, the anomaly that keeps the staffer awake at night, is the sound that never happened. Moving a craft of that estimated mass at those hypersonic speeds through dense sea-level air must generate a catastrophic sonic boom and a massive thermal signature. Yet the object displaced no air and generated no heat. It operated with complete impunity, openly violating our current primitive understanding of thermodynamics. This is the precise moment the cosmic dread sets in. The bureaucrat in the windowless room realizes that humanity is not the apex predator. We are a tribal species, throwing sharp rocks at the sky, completely outmatched by an intelligence that casually manipulates the local space-time metric. They are not simply flying through our air. They are dictating the fundamental rules of reality right above our heads, while we debate trivial politics below. You have been taught to view the military as an impenetrable shield, the ultimate guarantor of your safety. But the radar telemetry from 2004 proves that the shield is made of paper. Our fighter jets were dispatched to intercept the anomaly, and they were treated with the indifferent curiosity a scientist might show a slow-moving insect. We were outmaneuvered not by superior training, but by a chilling, incomprehensible intellect. This is exactly why the United States Senate panicked 2 decades later. You do not draft aggressive 64-page legislation invoking eminent domain because you found a weather balloon or a foreign surveillance drone. You deploy the nuclear option of federal law when your undisputed military hegemony is effortlessly bypassed, and you realize you have absolutely zero defensive capabilities against whatever is operating in your own airspace. The cold mathematics of the Nimitz encounter forced the government to admit that the gods are real, and they are currently swimming in our oceans and hovering in our skies. But radar data is just a shadow on a screen. If the sensors proved the phenomenon was physically interacting with our world, then someone, somewhere, must have picked up the pieces that fell. And that physical debris leads us straight into a terrifying corporate labyrinth. The physical reality of these anomalous craft is unquestionable to the military sensors we just analyzed. But when the United States Senate finally stopped looking at the sky and went hunting for the physical debris, they slammed into a wall far more impenetrable than any alien alloy. They hit a corporate firewall. You have been taught that the government holds its deepest secrets in heavily guarded federal bunkers, but your high school civics textbook lied to you. The true intellectual horror of our modern era is not that the state is hiding gods from you. It is that the state no longer even owns the gods. We are accustomed to fearing the vast bureaucracy of the Pentagon, yet the ultimate cosmic truths are not filed in government archives. They are locked away as intellectual property. The aerospace defense engineer standing in a massive, unmarked warehouse in the American Southwest knows this reality intimately. Through the eyes of this engineer, the mundane reality of a forklift moving standard shipping crates across a concrete floor dissolves into a terrifying lattice of power. Superimposed over these anonymous wooden boxes are complex flowcharts of shell companies and untraceable dark money. He sees the absolute privatization of human destiny. The recovered materials hidden inside these crates do not belong to the taxpayers, nor are they subject to democratic oversight. This is precisely why the 2023 Schumer-Rounds Act explicitly targeted legacy aerospace defense contractors. The Senate Intelligence Committee realized that the most dangerous threat to their authority was not a foreign adversary, but an accounting loophole. They were forced to write aggressive federal legislation to bypass an administrative trick designed to keep the greatest discovery in human history legally out of their reach. If the government radar tracked the anomalies and the military recovered the subsequent crash debris, how did the Pentagon lose control of the physical evidence? The answer is a bureaucratic masterpiece of evasion. Decades ago, someone deep within the intelligence apparatus realized that anything held by a federal agency is eventually subject to public scrutiny. So, they quietly moved the wreckage out of the public domain and into the shadowy private sector. They utilized a mechanism known as Independent Research and Development, or IRAD. This is not a paranoid conspiracy theory. It is standard operating procedure for the military-industrial complex. The IRAD loophole allows defense corporations to use their own internal funds to analyze and reverse engineer advanced technologies. By funding the research themselves, the corporations ensure that the resulting intellectual property remains strictly corporate. Here is the beautiful, terrifying paradox of that legal maneuver. Even if the base material, the crashed exotic craft, was originally handed over by the United States government, the moment a private contractor spends its own money to study it, the scientific discoveries become trade secrets. The engineer looking at the shipping crates understands that the fundamental laws of physics are currently being patented by isolated boards of directors. By allegedly transferring these recovered off-world materials to private corporations decades ago, the Department of Defense executed the ultimate disappearing act. They successfully removed the alien artifacts from the reach of the Freedom of Information Act. You cannot file a public records request against a private aerospace company. The paper trail simply vanishes into the black hole of corporate non-disclosure agreements and unacknowledged special access programs. You believe that science is a noble, open pursuit, a shared human endeavor slowly illuminating the darkness of the cosmos. That is a comforting myth designed for the masses. True paradigm-shifting science, the kind that shatters our understanding of thermodynamics and gravity, is hoarded. It is treated as a strategic asset, weaponized for quarterly earnings and endless defense contracts, while academic physicists play with fundamentally outdated models. The chilling realization that swept through the Capitol basement was that unelected chief executive officers possessed materials capable of rewriting human history. These corporate entities are entirely insulated from democratic control, answering only to their shareholders and their profit margins. The Senate did not draft a 64-page law because they wanted to share the truth with you. They drafted it because they realized they had lost control of the monopoly. We are facing an intelligence that crosses interstellar distances or alternate dimensions with casual ease, and our species' response was to hide the physical evidence behind corporate tax law. The absolute absurdity of this situation is the essence of cosmic horror. We took the wreckage of gods and turned it into an unregulated corporate asset. The engineer in the warehouse is not looking at a scientific breakthrough. He is guarding a stolen anomaly. The lawmakers who penned the UAP Disclosure Act understood that humanity is currently a divided, blind species, kept in the dark by a handful of executives. If a higher intelligence is indeed monitoring our progress, they are watching us patent their discarded technology, while the rest of our civilization argues over trivialities. We are a terrarium managed by greed, fundamentally incapable of comprehending the sheer scale of our own profound ignorance. But the legal maneuvers, the untraceable dark money, and the corporate firewalls are merely the perimeter defense. The true existential dread lies in what exactly these aerospace contractors are hiding inside those sterile clean rooms. Because when you finally breach the vault and place the recovered physical material under an electron microscope, the illusion of human supremacy completely collapses. What sits on that titanium pedestal refuses to obey the rules of Earth. You were taught that the universe plays by a single set of rules, beautifully organized in the periodic table hanging in your high school chemistry class. But those corporate vaults we just opened are not guarding empty space or theoretical physics models. They are guarding physical materials that fundamentally refuse to obey Earth's isotopic rules. Through the thick glass of a positive pressure clean room, the aerospace defense engineer looks at a metallic sphere resting on a titanium pedestal. A high-energy laser pulses, striking the surface of the sphere to measure its atomic composition. The engineer does not feel the thrill of discovery. He feels the cold, isolating dread of an intellect breaking against an impossible artifact. The readouts on the mass spectrometer begin to populate, and the data is a mathematical nightmare. What does a recovered artifact actually look like under a microscope? It looks like a terrifying message written in a language we cannot speak. You probably assume that a piece of metal is just a piece of metal, bound by the familiar forging processes of our solar system. That is your terrestrial bias showing. The data scrolling across the engineer's monitor reveals isotopic signatures that simply do not align with anything born from the dust cloud that created our sun. The true cosmic horror is an atomic structure that proves our entire scientific understanding is merely a local, insignificant dialect in a vast universe. This is no longer a fringe conspiracy whispered in dark corners. It is a matter of unclassified, sworn congressional record. In July of 2023, former intelligence officer David Grusch sat before the House Oversight Committee under the penalty of perjury. He did not speak of blurry photographs or strange lights in the sky. He testified to the existence of intact and partially intact vehicles of definitively non-human origin hidden within these very corporate programs. When the committee pressed him on how the intelligence community could possibly verify such an earth-shattering claim, his answer was chillingly clinical. He explicitly stated that these assessments were not based on guesswork, but on the vehicle's physical morphologies and exhaustive material science testing. He pointed directly to unique atomic arrangements and radiological signatures that simply cannot be manufactured by any known industrial process on this planet. Your textbooks confidently assert that human metallurgy is at the apex of its evolution, capable of forging alloys that withstand the vacuum of space. But the engineer in that sterile room knows you are being lied to. He is looking at the proof. The object on the pedestal is not an accidental meteorite. It is a purposefully engineered device, a deliberate manipulation of matter that treats the fundamental laws of thermodynamics as optional suggestions rather than absolute limits. Let us examine the unclassified literature that has managed to leak through the corporate firewall. We constantly see references to highly anomalous magnesium-bismuth alloys. These are not materials you simply melt and mix in a crucible. We are talking about structures layered and engineered at the sub-micron level, completely alternating elements in a way that functions as a potential terahertz waveguide. It is a material designed to control the flow of electromagnetic energy itself. Look at the cold reality unfolding in that laboratory. The engineer stares at the electron microscope feed and realizes the sheer absurdity of human arrogance. We take pride in our microchips and our particle accelerators, but the alloy under his lens is integrated at a scale that makes our most advanced nanotechnology look like a child smashing rocks together. The atomic layers are stacked with a precision that fundamentally defies the natural entropic decay of the physical universe. We are staring directly at metamaterials manufactured with an atomic perfection that human industry fundamentally cannot replicate. The isotopic ratios suggest the raw materials were harvested from a different star system, perhaps even a different epoch of the universe. This is not a slight technological advantage. This suggests an origin from a civilization thousands, perhaps millions of years ahead of us in the evolutionary timeline. We are not the apex predator. We are the bacteria. Your entire reality, your daily struggles, your stock market fluctuations, and your political tribalism are all rendered entirely meaningless by the metallic sphere sitting in that California laboratory. The universe is not a chaotic, empty void waiting for humanity to conquer it. It is already conquered. It is already populated by architects who manipulate the very fabric of reality while we are still burning fossilized plants to generate our electricity. The engineer pulls back from the microscope, the hum of the cleanroom suddenly feeling like the suffocating weight of an ocean trench. He understands what the Senate Intelligence Committee understood. We have captured an artifact of the gods, and our brightest minds are completely paralyzed by it. We cannot reverse engineer it. We can only stare at it in profound, existential terror, realizing that the authors of this technology might return for their property at any given moment. The ontological shock of this realization is exactly what the defense contractors are trying to suppress. But if this scale of cosmic truth blows your mind too, hit the like button right now. If you are ready to stop believing the comforting lies and want to follow this investigation into the darkest corners of the shadow government, subscribe to the channel. Do you think humanity is actually ready for this reality? Let me know in the comments below, because the Senate clearly panicked. We are hoarding a technological miracle, legally defined as non-human, and treating it as a corporate secret. But the deeper we look into the atomic abyss of these metamaterials, the more a terrifying realization begins to dawn. If the vehicles possess physical morphologies that defy terrestrial science, then we must ask the question that finally broke the silence in the Capitol. What exactly is piloting them? And where, in all these vast warehouses, are they hiding the biological evidence? The biological questions we just asked about these impossible materials did not go unnoticed. The threat of exposing these artifacts, of finally dragging the non-human reality into the light, triggered the most aggressive lobbying campaign in modern legislative history. The system detected an anomaly in its own programming, and it immediately deployed antibodies to neutralize the truth. Through the eyes of a Senate Intelligence Committee staffer standing in a dimly lit, wood-paneled room in the Capitol, the death of human curiosity is not dramatic. It is entirely bureaucratic. 3 silhouettes stand around a mahogany desk, methodically striking lines through a document with heavy black markers. The camera focuses on the thick final redactions. The ink bleeds through the paper. You were taught that a democratic government holds the ultimate monopoly on power. So you must ask a terrifying question. If the Senate Majority Leader backed this disclosure, if the highest elected officials in the world demanded to know what we are sharing our airspace with, why did the disclosure fail? Because true power does not reside in elected office. It resides in the shadows. Your high school civics textbook is a comforting fairy tale. The moment the Schumer-Rounds Amendment threatened the private monopoly on non-human technology, the military-industrial complex launched a devastating counterattack. The staffer watches the physical manifestation of this invisible war, elected representatives acting as proxies for unaccountable defense contractors, killing the light. The autopsy of this legislation is mathematically precise and deeply humiliating. Despite passing the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, the core enforcement mechanisms of the Schumer-Rounds Act were systematically gutted in the House of Representatives. This happened behind closed doors during the final reconciliation of the National Defense Authorization Act in late 2023. The horror here is not alien. It is the realization that human elites would rather maintain their fragile, temporary dominance over this tiny planet than admit our collective insignificance in the cosmos. The staffer watches the black markers cross out sections defining our place in the universe. Each stroke of the pen is a deliberate choice to keep the human race locked inside a dark box. The most crucial weapon the government possessed was the eminent domain clause. This was the exact legal mechanism designed to forcefully seize non-human technology from private corporate vaults and return it to the public domain. And it was entirely stripped from the final bill. The senators were legally disarmed by the very corporate entities they were attempting to investigate. Let that sink in. The United States government legally surrendered its jurisdiction over off-world artifacts to private aerospace executives. We are dealing with an intelligence that manipulates the fabric of space-time, and our defense against it is managed by corporate shareholders who operate completely outside the bounds of democratic oversight. The tail is wagging the cosmic dog. The betrayal did not stop there. The original legislation demanded an independent subpoena review board with immense authority to declassify documents. This board was directly modeled after the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. But the lobbyists ensured this mechanism was heavily neutralized before the bill ever reached the president's desk. The revised, toothless language left the disclosure process essentially up to the very intelligence agencies accused of hiding the information in the first place. The staffer staring at the heavily redacted pages realizes the ultimate absurdity of the situation. The system investigated itself, found itself entirely innocent, and classified the evidence of its own massive, multi-generational deception. This is the true cosmic horror. We are a terrarium managed by higher powers, yes, but the glass of our cage is being polished by our own leaders. They are so terrified of the ontological shock, so desperate to protect the current economic paradigm, that they have outlawed the greatest scientific revelation in human history. The truth was written down, and they simply painted over it in black. If you are finally seeing the bars of this cage, if this scale of systemic deception blows your mind, hit the like button right now. To not miss the solution to this mystery and to follow the data where the government refuses to go, subscribe to the channel. Do you think we stood a chance against the aerospace lobby? Let me know in the comments, because the people in that room knew they had lost. The markers stop moving. The 64 pages of revolutionary law have been reduced to a hollow shell. The contractors won the battle for the hardware, but the shadow war left a paper trail that cannot be entirely erased. The technology remains hidden, but the Senate's desperate attempt confirmed one absolute certainty. They know exactly what they are hiding, and they are terrified of what is inside. The technology they hid in those blacked-out documents is only one half of the equation. The hardware is just a shell. The other half is far more disturbing, hidden within the legislation under a chillingly sterile classification: biological evidence. Look down at this medical examiner's table. It is stainless steel, bathed in harsh, cold light, and completely empty. The camera slowly zooms in on the microscopic scratches marring the steel surface. The absolute absence of a physical body here is infinitely more terrifying than the presence of one. If there are vehicles defying the fundamental laws of thermodynamics in our airspace, who or what is sitting in the pilot's seat? You were taught biology as a closed, terrestrial system. You assume that intelligence requires a carbon-based biped, a creature born from the slow, bloody crawl out of Earth's oceans. Your high school textbooks lied to you by omission. The universe does not owe you a reflection in the mirror. When you strip away human arrogance, you are forced to confront the darkest two words ever uttered under oath in a congressional hearing. We must return to July of 2023. Before the House Oversight Committee, former intelligence officer David Grusch sat under the immense legal weight of a sworn oath. The superficial debate over blurred radar screens ended right there. He was asked a direct, inescapable question by a sitting member of Congress. Has the United States government recovered the pilots of these craft? Notice the precise phrasing. They did not ask about fossilized microbes on a meteorite or faint radio signals from deep space. They asked about the physical recovery of operators. The operators of machines that can execute a 600 G-force maneuver without shattering. The intelligence community does not use words carelessly. Grusch did not say we found aliens. He did not say we found little green men. His exact response, entered into the permanent, legally binding congressional record, was radically precise. He stated that biologics came with some of these recoveries. Let that specific noun echo in your mind. Biologics. Not bodies, not pilots, not corpses. The deliberate use of this term by an intelligence officer is a surgical strike against your foundational understanding of life itself. Why use such an alienating clinical term? Because the word body implies a birth, a natural biological life cycle, and a death. It implies a kinship that simply does not exist here. When the committee pressed him further, demanding to know if these biologics were human or non-human, the ontological shock hit the room like a physical wave. The official narrative fractured forever. Grusch looked directly at the committee and stated definitively, non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program. There was no hesitation, no ambiguity. You are hearing the terminal diagnosis of human supremacy. We are not alone, and the intelligence sharing our airspace is not a cousin of humanity. It is something fundamentally, terrifyingly other. The intelligence community's distinction between bodies and biologics is a calculated mechanism of classification. It points towards something far more complex than a biological organism taking a joyride in a flying saucer. We are forced to consider the horrifying probability of synthetic biology. We are looking at engineered avatars, organic drones manufactured for the sole purpose of operating in our atmosphere. If these entities are synthetic, if they are printed like circuitry rather than born, then we are entirely misjudging the threat. You are looking for a pilot, but you might be looking at an autonomous biological sensor, a disposable probe sent by an architect who remains hidden in the dark forest of the cosmos. We are essentially trying to interrogate a camera while the photographer watches from the void. Your entire worldview is calibrated to human constraints. You think in terms of lifespans, fatigue, and organic fragility. But an intelligence capable of engineering post-biological avatars operates on a timescale that makes the entirety of human history look like a momentary spark. The scratches on this empty steel table represent our desperate, primitive attempt to dissect gods with scalpels. Stare at the empty table. It represents the utter failure of human science to categorize the anomaly. Whatever lay on this steel surface did not fit into our terrestrial taxonomy. It had no place on Darwin's evolutionary tree. It is a biological orphan, an artifact made of meat and unknown genetic code, confirming that Earth is merely a drop-in center for life forms we cannot even begin to classify. The presence of engineered biologics implies a laboratory, a factory, a creator. It forces you to realize that we are not the pinnacle of creation. We are simply the local wildlife. We are an ant farm managing our trivial borders, completely oblivious to the boot poised above the glass. The creators of these biologics treat our airspace with the casual indifference of researchers in a quarantine zone. This is exactly why the Senate panicked behind closed doors. You cannot negotiate with a synthetic avatar. You cannot sign a treaty with a biological drone. The Schumer-Rounds Amendment was a pathetic attempt to legislate our way out of the food chain. The government finally realized that the entities piloting these craft do not care about our laws, our military, or our self-appointed status as the apex predator. We are left with the crushing reality of that empty medical table. The evidence is gone, locked away in corporate vaults, hidden from the very public that is being monitored by their creators. You are living in a biological terrarium, and the handlers have already breached the perimeter. The autopsy of our reality is complete, and the cause of death is our own overwhelming insignificance. The autopsy of our biological supremacy is only the prologue. The existence of these non-human biologics, these synthetic avatars recovered from crash sites, forces us to confront a far more terrifying reality: the physics of the entities controlling them. Look at the supercomputer simulation projecting our solar system. Earth is highlighted, a comforting blue dot of assumed importance. But as the camera violently pulls back, past the Oort cloud, that comfort evaporates into the dark. We accelerate past our local galactic arm, and within seconds, your entire world, your history, your wars and your laws are reduced to less than a single pixel on this screen. This is not a meaningless exercise in astronomy. This is the true scale of the theater we have unknowingly entered. Your high school textbooks promised a universe governed by strict limits, where the speed of light protected us from sudden visitors. You were lied to. The quarantine has been definitively breached. If these biological drones are already violating our airspace, and their creators can bypass the seemingly absolute barriers of deep space, a single, paralyzing question remains. What is their intent? The cosmos offers only a terrifying, clinical silence in response. You assume that contact with an advanced intelligence would look like a diplomatic mission or a planetary invasion. This is a fundamental, arrogant misconception born from our own primitive human history of conquest. To understand their intent, look at the mathematics of how they move. The observed capabilities of unidentified anomalous phenomena do not rely on combustion or traditional aerodynamics. The telemetry suggests they are utilizing metric engineering. This is the localized manipulation of the space-time metric itself, essentially bending the fabric of reality around the craft. It is the practical, physical manifestation of what theoretical physicists call the Alcubierre warp drive model. While human aerospace engineers celebrate fractional improvements in jet propulsion, these vehicles are folding the geometry of the universe to simply drop into our atmosphere. They do not fly. They redefine the space they occupy. You were programmed to believe that bending space-time was a mathematical curiosity reserved for black holes and chalkboard theories. But the military radar data confirms that this reality-breaking physics is functioning right now, right above your head. Here is the paradox that truly terrified the Pentagon. Executing these space-time manipulations should instantly incinerate everything nearby. Yet, these crafts do not generate lethal heat signatures or blasts of ionizing radiation. A civilization capable of manipulating gravity without instantly sterilizing the surrounding environment fundamentally shatters our energy models. We are observing the operational footprint of a Type 2 or even a Type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale. Let that categorization sink in. A Type 2 civilization does not drill for oil or split atoms in fragile reactors. They are capable of harnessing the entire energy output of their native star system. A Type 3 civilization commands the energy of an entire galaxy. The simulation on the screen, showing the vast, cold sweep of the Milky Way, is not an uncharted wilderness to them. It is their infrastructure. They are the architects, and we are merely microbes living in the basement. Your politicians posture and threaten each other with our ultimate weapon, convinced that mutually assured destruction makes us powerful. But against an intelligence that views space-time as a malleable fabric, our entire global nuclear arsenal is a joke. We possess roughly 12,100 warheads. To a civilization that harvests stars, unleashing every nuclear bomb on Earth simultaneously is the strategic equivalent of a termite colony threatening a heavily armored bulldozer. They could absorb our most apocalyptic strike without triggering a warning light on their control panels. This is the intellectual horror that the Senate Intelligence Committee staffer realized while reading those classified files. The concept of human defense is an illusion, a psychological comfort blanket we clutch in the dark. We are completely, structurally, and fundamentally defenseless against an entity that can bypass our physical laws as easily as you step over a crack in the pavement. The official narrative insists on viewing everything as a potential threat to national security, assuming we are important enough to be attacked. But the true cosmic horror is profoundly more isolating. The terror is not that these architects want to destroy us, harvest our resources, or conquer our fragile planet. The ultimate nightmare is that they may not even register us as a significant threat or a biologically equal intelligence. We are simply not that interesting to them. You worry about an alien invasion because human psychology is rooted in conquest and resource scarcity. But why would a civilization that controls the energy of 1 billion stars fight over a wet rock? They fly through our airspace, disarming our nuclear silos and observing our military maneuvers with the same clinical, detached curiosity a biologist applies to a petri dish. They do not speak to us because you do not attempt to hold diplomatic negotiations with a colony of bacteria. Watch the simulation pull back even further. Our entire solar system vanishes into the chaotic swirl of the galactic core. The universe is not a nurturing cradle waiting for humanity to take its first steps. It is an impossibly ancient, cold machine running on rules we are too primitive to comprehend. The Schumer-Rounds Amendment was an attempt to regulate the behavior of gods using the paperwork of mortals. It was a pathetic scream into the abyss, demanding that the abyss obey local laws. We are adrift in a cosmos heavily populated by intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic. Our greatest scientific achievements are less than a child's toys to them. When the government finally comprehended this insurmountable, humiliating gap in the hierarchy of existence, they realized the real danger was no longer the technology itself. The true threat was what this knowledge would do to the human mind. They had to hide the truth not to protect the sky, but to protect the fragile human psyche. The technological gap explains the military panic, but the true reason for the 80-year cover-up is purely sociological. Look at the crowd through the exhausted eyes of the Senate Intelligence Committee staffer, staring down at Times Square from a secure window. Millions of oblivious people are marching under glaring neon lights, entirely consumed by their artificial digital worries. They are staring at their glowing screens, fighting over politics and engineered social trends. Why keep this a secret for 8 decades? You were programmed to believe the government hid the flying discs to reverse engineer weapons and dominate the geopolitical chessboard. I assure you, that is a comforting, human-centric lie. As the staffer's gaze pans up from the blinding billboards to the cold, empty expanse of the night sky, the terrifying truth settles in. The intelligence community did not build this labyrinth of lies to protect the technology. They built it to protect you. Deep within the classified archives, the intelligence apparatus operates on a brutal foundational principle: the prevention of what sociologists call ontological shock. This is not a panic attack or a temporary dip in the stock market. Ontological shock is the sudden, catastrophic psychological collapse of an entire society when its fundamental understanding of reality is irrevocably proven false. It is the moment the terrarium glass shatters and the ants realize they are trapped in a jar. Your entire reality is held together by a fragile collective agreement. If humanity is definitively proven not to be the apex intelligence, every single pillar of modern civilization instantly crumbles. Theological frameworks built over millennia become obsolete myths. Macroeconomic growth models, based on endless human expansion, are rendered pointless. Most importantly, the nation-state's sacred monopoly on violence is exposed as a pathetic joke against forces that manipulate space-time. You think this is a recent revelation? The architects of our world calculated this psychological breaking point before we even put a man in orbit. In 1960, the Brookings Institution delivered a document to NASA titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. The staffer reads this foundational text with creeping dread. The report explicitly warned that discovering superior alien life could cause Earth's civilization to completely collapse. The greatest minds of the 20th century concluded that the human ego could not survive the downgrade from the center of the universe to a cosmic afterthought. You are a biological machine optimized for local survival, not for confronting the infinite abyss. If the masses realized their daily grind, their laws, and their wars were completely irrelevant on the cosmic scale, the illusion of order would evaporate. People would simply stop going to work, and the entire global engine would stall. This brings us back to the frantic, heavily redacted pages on that mahogany table in the Capitol basement. The Senate's desperate attempt to legislate disclosure in 2023 was never about transparent government or scientific sharing. It was a highly calculated, controlled demolition of our worldview. The Intelligence Committee staffer realized they were trying to bleed the pressure out of the system. They needed to break the news through boring, bureaucratic channels. The politicians wanted to gradually acclimatize the public to their own cosmic insignificance, using the sterile language of the Schumer-Rounds Amendment. It was an attempt to mitigate the shock of a catastrophic, uncontrolled revelation. A massive, undeniable craft decloaking over a major city would render every terrestrial authority instantly powerless. That is the apocalyptic scenario the Senate was trying to preempt by using dry legal definitions and eminent domain property laws. They tried to domesticate the unimaginable dread of the universe by wrapping it in a 64-page defense authorization bill. But as the staffer watches the oblivious millions scrolling through their social media feeds down below, the agonizing futility of the effort becomes clear. You cannot legislate away the abyss. The bureaucratic firewall failed, and now we are simply waiting for the inevitable moment when the human race looks up and finally understands exactly how small it is. The bureaucratic firewall of the Senate failed, the defense contractors won their silent war, and the public went right back to sleep under the neon lights. But as you stand on the edge of the Pacific Ocean and watch the stars pierce the twilight, you must understand that the paradigm has already shifted. The sky above you is no longer a canopy of exploration. It is a ceiling of observation. The true existential horror of the Schumer-Rounds Amendment is not what it successfully accomplished on the floor of the Capitol. The chilling reality is the simple, undeniable fact that it had to be written at all. We're looking at 64 pages of pure, distilled panic. It is a legally binding axiom of our own vulnerability, drafted by an empire realizing it is no longer the apex predator. We began this investigation searching for a political anomaly. I walked you through radar telemetry that openly mocks thermodynamics, micron-layered metamaterials locked deep inside unaccountable corporate cleanrooms, and the clinical, terrifying terminology of non-human biologics. The conclusion we have reached is not a fringe conspiracy. It is an unavoidable, peer-reviewed, mathematical certainty. The quiet death of the eminent domain clause is your final lesson in terrestrial power dynamics. It proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the power to conceal the fundamental nature of reality is vastly stronger than the power of democratic legislation. The ink dried, the legal mechanisms were gutted in the dark, and the military-industrial complex maintained its absolute monopoly on the truth. Yet here in 2026, the geopolitical and scientific landscape is irrevocably altered. The highest levels of the United States government have formally acknowledged that we are likely sharing our atmosphere with vehicles of non-human origin. The institutional denial has collapsed under the weight of its own data. The case is closed, the evidence is logged, and the verdict is terrifying. It is time to definitively discard the supreme arrogance of human history. You are not the center of the universe, and you are not the pinnacle of biological evolution. You are merely an inhabitant of a localized, fragile terrarium. We are existing on a tiny speck of dust, constantly watched by eyes we cannot see, and governed by a higher architecture of physics we cannot even begin to comprehend. This is the ultimate intellectual challenge of our era. The frantic paperwork of the Senate was nothing more than a desperate bureaucratic shield raised against the cold, indifferent mechanics of the cosmos. We are a species protected by a government that is completely terrified of the dark. Your perspective must shift. Your homework is to learn how to function while staring directly into this abyss. We have reached the end of this specific syllabus, but the aggressive observation of our skies and our classified vaults must continue. If this deep forensic analysis shattered your obsolete worldview and provided a new lens on reality, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. That is how we map the blind spots of human knowledge and continue this critical research into the unknown together. The infinite ocean of stars above you is not empty, and it certainly is not waiting for your permission to operate within our atmosphere. Accept this profound insignificance not as a defeat, but as the new, cold baseline of human existence. The comforting illusion of our absolute supremacy has been permanently dispelled. The truth is out there, and it is terrifying. Class dismissed and signing off.